Good evening. Oh, you can do better than that. Good evening.
Good evening.
So hopefully by now you've had an opportunity to meet the people sitting at your table. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty excited about this discussion that we're going to have this evening. My name is Ryan Parker. I'm Chief Diversity Officer here at RWJBarnabas University Hospital. So I want to welcome you as we address this very important issue this evening. An important part of our mission at RWJ is to build partnerships and foster collaboration and education beyond the walls of our academic health campus. Discussions like the one we will engage in tonight are key parts of our mission to encourage the free exchange of knowledge to enhance the quality of life and raise the health status of the diverse communities we serve. Here at RWJ, you will hear or see a phrase, "Everyone matters." And that's why we take topics like the one we'll discuss tonight so seriously. Human trafficking by any personal or statistical measure is an alarming problem with many victims. However, the 2014 Department of State Trafficking in Persons report cautions that numbers fail to convey the true impact of trafficking on our society. According to the report, and I quote, "Reporters often lead with numbers, but reliable statistics related to human trafficking are difficult to find. Human trafficking is a clandestine crime, and few victims and survivors come forward for fear of retaliation, shame, or lack of understanding of what is happening to them. Numbers alone are not always the story." Then the report goes on to urge the media to focus on individual stories of survival, new initiatives designed to stop trafficking, and innovative research efforts to shed light on this brutal and soulless crime. This evening, all of you are here to focus on this issue and to offer unique insights and expertise to develop strategies that will attack trafficking at its source and prevent it from harming more innocent individuals. I'd like to thank the individuals and organizations for their support and hard work in making tonight's program possible, and they are Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey, the New Jersey chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, RWJ's Level 1 Trauma Center and its Injury Prevention Program, RWJ's Pastoral Care Department, the members of the Planning Committee, which spans many hospital departments, and all of our panelists who have been so kind to take time out of their busy schedules to share their insights. Before I close, I'd like to leave you with these final words. You've been given this day to choose as you will. You can waste it or use it for good. When tomorrow comes, this day, our time together this evening will be gone forever, and in its place, something left behind. So I ask you this evening, what will you leave behind? I hope it is a meaningful discussion which will evoke a renewed commitment to ending human trafficking and restoring the dignity of the victims affected by this horrible act. Again, welcome. At this time, I'd like to invite to the stage Diana Staris, Injury Prevention Coordinator from the Level 1 Trauma Center here at Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital. Diana.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Just a few housekeeping items for you, and then we'll get on to the program. Some of these are really important, like for instance, where are the restrooms? So through the glass doors over there and through the glass doors over there, there are restrooms, okay? Secondly, very important, I would ask all of you to turn off your phones, or at the very least put them on silent. Because the first one who gets the ringing phone in the middle is going to be really embarrassed. I would also like to remind you that parking today, there is a $4 flat fee. When this is over, you'll be going to the reception desks, there are several of them, to get your parking validated, so don't lose your parking ticket. You all have index cards that you were given when you registered, and there are more in the middle of the table. What we'd like you to do is write down any questions that you might have regarding human trafficking. When the keynote speaker is finished speaking, or as the keynote finishes up, we will be coming around to collect those questions, and we will be addressing those things while the audience discussion is going on, which you'll note in your program. If you have further questions while the discussion going on, there will be two people walking around with microphones so that we can get your thoughts and opinions on this topic. And then you all also were handed evaluations. And at the end, we will collect those evaluations, and you will be given a certificate of attendance. Nurses, you'll get your contact hour certificates, and if there are EMS people here, I don't have a specific certificate, so I'm assuming that it'll just be that you've signed it, and then we'll hand that sign-in sheet over to EMS for the state. All right? Any questions? All right. I'm going to play a video to start us off, and then we will get on. So on that note, and we can hear a pin drop here now, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Jeffrey Chiesa. Jeffrey is an experienced litigator with an impressive background in both the public and private sectors, practices in the firm Wolf and Sampson, and involved with litigation, corporate internal investigations, and monitoring, and white-collar criminal defense groups. In June of 2013, Governor Chris Christie appointed Mr. Chiesa to serve in the United States Senate following the death of Senator Frank Lautenberg. At the time of his appointment to the United States Senate, Mr. Chiesa was serving as New Jersey's 59th Attorney General. His achievements as Attorney General included leading the state's public safety efforts following Superstorm Sandy, bringing significant corruption and gang prosecutions, combating human trafficking, creating safeguards to address prescription drug abuse, and helping to lead Governor Christie's efforts to strengthen New Jersey's criminal laws to protect its most vulnerable citizens. We asked Mr. Chiesa here today because we know that human trafficking is a passion of his, and we would like him to speak to you about that and give you his thoughts. So please welcome Mr. Jeffrey Chiesa.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Diana, for putting together such a worthwhile event. You know, that video we just saw is a really stark reminder to me why something like this is so important. When I was serving as Attorney General, I thought that we did, as a law enforcement community, a lot of things really, really well. We know how to investigate drug cases, and we know how to investigate gang cases, and we do corruption cases, and we do money laundering cases. But we're good at those cases because we understand them. We have a lot of experience with them. And they're the kinds of crimes that are clearly differentiated. In other words, we see that kind of conduct. It's easy to identify, and it's easy to identify who the culprits are and who the victims are. One of the things you'll notice in that video you saw, and I've never seen that one before, and that's really well done, is that not only do the victims of human trafficking get ensnared in what is an absolutely awful situation, many times they're not only victimized by their captors, but then they're later victimized by law enforcement because we don't understand exactly how to deal with these cases. I'll give you an example. For many years, as a law enforcement community, we would come on the scene to what otherwise looks like a brothel and arrest the people that were running it and arrest the women that we believed were consensually engaging in sex for pay. Well, many times when we come onto those scenes, that's not what it is. Many times when we come on those scenes, not only have those women been forced into that situation, but then we as a law enforcement community, because we have been trained to recognize prostitution and recognize what we're supposed to do in those situations, then look to charge the women that are there. So one of the things I'd like to start with tonight is to start a dialogue that really recognizes what we're talking about here. And we call it human trafficking, and that is its term. But everyone in this room should start calling it slavery, because that's what it really is. There are more slaves in this world right now than there were during the Civil War. The first time I heard somebody tell me that, I couldn't believe it. It's such a foreign concept to anybody who lives in this country, but it's the truth. We have more slaves in this world now than we did during the Civil War. So what do? Well, what we need to do as a law enforcement community is to really learn about it, address it, and not doubly victimize the people who are forced into it. One of the panel members here tonight I had a chance to talk with a few minutes ago is Special Agent Salaveria, who investigated a case that was my introduction to human trafficking when I was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I'm going to frame this case a little bit. I'm sure he'll talk about it more because he actually investigated it. He went to the country of Togo and for months put in the time to bring this case. But this case involved a woman in the country of Togo who convinced a group of parents that she was the ticket for their children to an education in the United States. So these parents, understanding what the resources they had and the likelihood of an education for their children and a prosperous life for their children in Togo was slight, made the heart-wrenching decision to send their children to the other side of the world. These parents were told that their children would come here and would get an education and would be able to realize all the dreams that so many Americans get to realize when they're here and they do receive an education. Well, when these girls got here, and they were, I believe, between ages 13 and 19, they were forced to work 6 days a week in a hair salon, and they were threatened. Some of them were sexually abused, many of them were physically abused. They had no family, they didn't speak our language, they didn't understand our culture, and they were threatened. Their documents were taken, so they had no ability to freely move about our country. Try to imagine, those of you who are parents, your 13-year-old, your 15-year-old, your 17-year-old, on the other side of the world with no support system in that environment. Well, due to the work of people like Special Agent Salaveria, we were able to get into that situation, and thankfully, due to his hard work and the work of others, the leader of that slavery ring got 27 years in jail. That is the only message we need to send people who engage in this practice. It's no longer a slap on the wrist. It's no longer, you know what, 3 or 4 years and you go back out, because that's a cost of doing business. When you take somebody's freedom, and that's what this is about, right? We take, their freedom is taken from them. Their trust is eviscerated. Because one of the things that the special agents have to do in a case like that is to reacquaint the victims with their ability to trust law enforcement. Because you can imagine if you found yourself in that situation for the time that these young women did, you're not going to trust anybody. And you can't blame them for not wanting to trust anybody. So these young women had the courage and the support of the agents in that case and the prosecutors in that case. They went into a courtroom and confronted the woman and the 2 other people who were involved in that slavery ring. And those convictions were a result of their hard work. So one of the things I thought we needed to do as a law enforcement community in New Jersey was to start talking candidly about slavery. And it's not, much of it is the sex slavery that we all associate with trafficking cases. But we did cases when I was in the Attorney General's office that involved young boys being sold for sex, drugged, taken from their support groups, drugged, and sold into sex. Domestic cases, farm cases. One of the things that this crime, one of the most insidious things about this crime is that sometimes it's in plain sight, and we just don't see it. We just don't see it because it looks, for example, if you're a domestic worker, it may look on the surface like it's perfectly fine. It's a perfectly legitimate family employing somebody to work in a job in their home. But we need to understand the signs and symptoms that can allow us to look past that in some situations and recognize what's really going on. What's really going on with people being threatened. What's really going on with people being told that if they say a word, they'll be sent back out of the country. And what we try to do, and Attorney General John Hoffman is continuing to do this, is to educate ourselves. So what we've done is we've told all 21 county prosecutors in this state, you have to start allocating resources to this crime. One of the things that makes New Jersey most attractive to traffickers is one of our greatest strengths, and that's the incredible diversity of our population. So not only are we an incredibly diverse population, we're the most condensed population in the country. So you can hide here. If you want to traffic and bring slaves here, you can hide them much more easily than you could in rural Wyoming or in western Texas. Just because those places are so much more spread out. Some of those places aren't as diverse as our state is. So this is a place where they're trying to do it. We know that. We know that, so we needed to get on top of our game and understand how we were going to get after it as a state. Because the federal government had been doing these cases for quite a while, very effectively. But there's so many of the cases, and as you can tell, and as most of you know because you're here tonight talking about this subject, these are the most voiceless victims you can have in a case. Most of the time they don't speak our language, so let's start with that. No family, no support group, no money, no resources. No maturity, many of them. 13 years old? With or without a family, you know that a 13-year-old needs guidance. So we've taken steps here, we continue to take steps here to do these cases and do them more effectively and recognize that we shouldn't be re-victimizing the people that are enslaved in these cases. And so when we hosted the Super Bowl last year, that is the absolute magnet for human trafficking. You got the Super Bowl and you got it in New Jersey, so it's the perfect place for these guys to come in and do these cases and try to enslave and sell men and women for whatever purposes they chose. And one of the most offensive parts of this process is, and this is a much more difficult issue, but there were advertisements of women online that had obviously been physically abused. So if you can picture it, you would see a picture of a 18-year-old woman standing maybe in some underwear and a t-shirt with bruises up and down her legs and bruises on her arms where she'd obviously been restrained, or evidence of drug abuse. The problem is that because while we want to get at that source of the advertising, because I think everybody would agree that it's incredibly offensive that you can advertise that anywhere, right? How is it possible that can happen? Well, the problem is that people are willing to pay for it, and people are willing to generate revenue off of it. And because of free speech issues and other things, it's much more difficult to draw a line. And I'm not interested in having a free speech debate tonight, I'm really not. What I am interested in having is a really frank discussion of what we're talking about. Because when you put a person who's been bruised and abused in an ad, everybody should be offended. But that's what happened. So with the help of the state police, with the help of our federal partners, with the help of everybody, we made sure that we made New Jersey as bad a place for someone who wants to enslave people as possible. And we allocated tons of resources and we got really good results. But until we create a climate where it's just not worth it, people are going to continue to do it. And so that everybody in this room understands that it's not just people from other countries. It's people, most particularly teenagers, who don't feel part of a group. Teenagers who don't have a good support system at home. Maybe they go home, both parents are working. And they can be most easily lured or connived by somebody who comes across as, I have the answers, I understand you. I'm going to give you the chance that your friends and your parents won't. And it all sounds good, and the next thing you know, they find themselves in a room, locked away, under threats if they try to leave. And they're sold for whatever purpose. And that is a reminder to all of us that when we think about this crime, we should think about it as existing in all of our communities, because it does. And it so degrades all of our value to think about that still happening. This is 2014. We think about all the steps we've taken as a society for decades and decades and decades to recognize the value of every human life. And if you click on the internet tonight, you can go look at an ad for a young girl who's been abused and is being sold to somebody. So we have a lot of work to do. But the best part about an evening like tonight, and why I'm always so honored and happy to be at an event like this, is because I'm thrilled that so many people are interested in talking about it. I'm thrilled that so many people, like our panel members who are experts on this, are willing to talk about it, so we continue this discussion. And for those of you that have children, I would absolutely suggest respectfully that you talk to them about it. Because if they can engage the person in their high school who seems a little bit adrift, or they can look out for them, or they can say to somebody, hey, you know what, I'm a little bit worried that that person could find themselves in that situation. If it's one time where we're able to stop one of these incidents, it's so worth it. And it's worth all of our time and all of our effort. But every time a group like this gets together, I notice these groups get a little bit bigger. We've certainly gotten smarter about these issues. And we certainly become more sensitive, as I said at the beginning, to making sure that we don't re-victimize the people that have been, really, let's be honest, they've been raped and tortured. And then we're questioning whether or not they should be charged with a crime. We just got to keep getting better at doing these cases. So as I said at the beginning, one of the things I'd like all of us to do as we talk about this issue is call it what it is. It's slavery. It's slavery in 2014, and it is something that we all need to eradicate with every effort we can make. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to talk about this issue tonight. I want to thank all the panel members and the organizers of this event. And most of all, I want to thank you for including me. It's an honor to be here tonight. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you, Senator Chiesa. I'm not sure how I'm doing with this microphone. My name is Patty Moida. I'm shorter. And I'm with Prevent Child Abuse New Jersey. I'm the manager of our Human Trafficking Prevention Initiative. And my job tonight is actually to introduce the panelists here and help moderate some discussion with you all and the panelists. But before I do that, I do want to provide for you just a basic understanding, some of the definitions of human trafficking, and also domestic minor sex trafficking, which is sort of the focal point that we're focusing on tonight. So I'm going to do that now. I'll ask you again, as Diana said earlier, if you have questions, please write them down on your index card so you don't forget, and we will certainly come around later and start collecting those questions. Okay, so the definition of human trafficking is actually defined by our Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which was enacted in the year 2000, which defines 3 forms of human trafficking. We have labor trafficking, adult sex trafficking, and minor sex trafficking, which is also child sex trafficking. So labor trafficking is, as you can imagine, forced labor, and as Senator Chiesa alluded to, you find this in New Jersey in the agricultural industry, in the hotel and hospitality industry, and in nail and hair salons. Adult sex trafficking, as Senator Chiesa also mentioned, can often be confused with prostitution. And the reason is there's a tremendous amount of overlap. They're not one and the same, but prostitution that is forced, either through force, fraud, or coercion, prostitution that is not someone's choice or someone consents to, is considered human trafficking. The definition for minor sex trafficking is a slightly different one. It's important for you to understand this. The slight difference is that any child or any person under the age of 18, by definition, is considered a victim of human trafficking regardless of the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Meaning anytime another person is profiting off of their involvement in a commercial sex act, they are considered to be a victim of trafficking. In New Jersey, you may know the legal age to consent to sex is 16. However, a child 16 or 17 years old cannot consent to be involved in commercial sex. They cannot consent to be involved in strip clubs, prostitution, massage parlors, pornography, and unfortunately we find their involvement in these fields all too often. So these kids are considered victims of human trafficking. Some terms you might hear us talk about tonight, we use the term CSEC, which stands for the Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children. This is a term that has that just refers to the exploitation of children across the entire world in any form. And the term domestic minor sex trafficking refers to CSEC of children within the United States. We're talking about the sex trafficking of U.S. children within U.S. borders. So the term human trafficking can be a little bit misleading because it has the word trafficking in it. So of course it makes us think about movement, crossing borders, and actually by definition movement is not required. It is used fairly often. It's a great way for traffickers to isolate their victims, to make sure they're confused, they're unable to access help, but it's not required. And we know of cases of children who were trafficked on the weekends and don't miss a day of school and sleep in their beds every night. And they may not have any idea they're being trafficked, but they're being forced to have sex by somebody who may pose as a boyfriend or a loved one. So we already covered this. This is where we see kids being exploited in the state of New Jersey. I think people hear the term child sex tourism and they think of places like Thailand or Costa Rica, and be aware there's also places like Dallas, Atlanta, Atlantic City. We watched a video earlier. It asked the question, if you could see it, would you end it? I think if we saw this right here, cut and dry, very clear-cut kidnapping case, we'd want to end that. The problem with our kids who are exploited domestically is it's not often this cut and dry. The kidnapping scenario is not the one we see most often. Traffickers have these are some of the different techniques that traffickers will use, and force is certainly one of them. But they may also use seduction. A child who's caught up in trafficking might really think they're just involved with a boyfriend who they're helping make money for. You can see from the quote here, this trafficker said, I would tell her that I loved her. If she loved me, it was easier for her to get her to do things for me. You may also find kids who think that they're simply involved in the wrong crowd. Maybe they're gang involved and selling sex is their contribution to the gang. Maybe there are kids who run away from home, or unfortunately we have a lot of throwaway kids who meet somebody on the streets who seems like another kid, a friendly face, who shows them the ropes. And this is how we get by and how we make money. So the idea of being forced might seem like a foreign one to them. It's especially challenging for kids who are trafficked by parents or caregivers who don't know any better, who don't know that having sex with the neighbors so the parents can have free rent isn't normal. So the idea of force, just be aware, is it's not always so clear. Again, the video asked if you could see it, would you end it? I like to think that the men who buy sex with teenage girls, if they stumbled upon a scene like this of a girl who's bruised and crying, would be so horrified, they would walk away and not pay for sex. Unfortunately, bruises don't make money for traffickers. So while the violence is there, the violence is endemic to trafficking, it's not uncommon to find victims of trafficking who from the outside don't appear like victims. This is a house in South Jersey. Back in 2005, the FBI, and I'm not sure if one of our panelists might have been involved with this, the FBI took down a trafficker who was holding somewhere between 6 and 8 women and girls in this house. And he had other properties in residential areas throughout the country. Yeah, I know. This is Galloway Township, for anyone who's wondering. He knew the best way to make money by selling young women and girls to high-paying clients was to have young women and girls who had their hair done, who had their nails done, who had very nice clothing on. If you saw these girls on the streets or in the casinos, they didn't look like victims. If you asked them or talked to them, they didn't sound like victims. because if you don't make money, the consequence is a beating. So you're going to act like you like what you do, which makes it that much more challenging to identify our domestic victims. So globally, human trafficking is an incredibly profitable business. This estimate is a conservative one, that it generates $35 billion annually. That's more than Starbucks, Nike, and Google combined. It's the second largest criminal industry, tied with arms dealing, and only surpassed by drug dealing in terms of profitability. There are 27 million victims worldwide. 50% are children and 80% are female. Within the United States, and this is alarming to many, 83% of the people trafficked within the U.S. are U.S. citizens, which again makes it that much harder to if the victims. If we're looking for red flags as somebody who doesn't have a passport, that doesn't help us find the domestic victims, the U.S.-born victims. Again, conservatively, at least 100,000 minors are exploited through sex trafficking in the U.S. every year. I've seen estimates that go much higher, but this is the one that we can really get behind. And all 50 states have reported cases of human trafficking. Child pornography is a huge part of this problem. 1 in 5 pornographic images is of a child, and more than half of child pornography is created here in the United States. In the U.S., child pornography generates $3 billion. Last year, we had over 500 calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which places us as the 13th highest call volume of the 50 states. Of course, we had the Super Bowl last year, which I think brought the call volume up, which was a good thing. People were more aware and recognizing it more. Of the cases that have been identified, about 2/3 of them were sex trafficking cases. This map shows where the calls came in from. The red areas are the hot spots. Not where the most trafficking necessarily happens, but where the most calls come from. New Jersey is vulnerable for several reasons, and one of them Senator Key has already pointed out. Other reasons, we are very close to major metropolitan areas, which makes movement very easy. A lot of traffickers have circuits. They move their victims from one city to another, say for a few days, and keep moving. It helps them evade law enforcement, helps them keep fresh product on the market for the buyers. So having many highways and truck stops also helps traffickers want to come to New Jersey or come through New Jersey. Atlantic City, as I mentioned, is a destination for child sex tourism. The Super Bowl and our military bases create an environment that's hypermasculine. Hypermasculine male environments tend to be areas where more sex trafficking is targeted. Our port, waterways, and airways help with a lot of movement. And lastly, Hurricane Sandy was a huge factor. We saw more displaced children, displaced families, job loss, and homelessness, which again creates more risk factors for potential trafficking. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our first panelist to introduce herself and share with you what she's been doing. Suzanne Alvino is our first panelist. She's the Assistant Director of Case Practice for New Jersey's Department of Children and Families, Division of Child Protection and Permanency. She's worked with children and families involved in the child welfare system for 28 years. Her professional responsibilities include working with state and local leadership to guide and improve overall case practice with a specific focus on policy around human trafficking victims and survivors.
Hello? Sorry. Good evening and welcome, and thank you all for coming tonight. As Patty mentioned, I work with the Child Protection Agency, lead agency in New Jersey, Child Protection and Permanency, previously called Division of Youth and Family Services. Our primary obligation is to investigate allegations of abuse and neglect, but often, and a large part of our work is working with and partnering with families and youth and community to strengthen families that are struggling and at risk. Over the past year and a half, we worked very diligently in the matter of human trafficking when we started to become aware of it, as many people did with the Super Bowl coming around. Like the Senator had mentioned, I think a year and a half ago, we often thought of maybe a 17-year-old young girl as a prostitute, if that's what she was doing. Some people thought perhaps she liked the adrenaline, liked the risk of that in her life. However, we've learned over the last year and a half that the youth that we're seeing involved in trafficking are the youth that we are already involved with. These are youth that have come from broken homes, have been sexually abused, have been physically abused, have substance use, have gender identity transitions where perhaps their family is not supportive of them, as Patty had mentioned, throwaway. So we've done a lot over the last year and a half. The first thing is to recognize it, and to recognize that these are our kids. A year and a half ago, we looked at this as a law enforcement criminal issue, and now we see it as a child welfare issue. So in child protection and permanency, we have two types of situations in which we'll get involved with. The typical is the allegation of abuse and neglect, which is by a parent or caretaker. And we also have a child welfare category, an assessment. So we might have a law enforcement agency, a judge, a clinical person, a hospital might call about the welfare of a child, not necessarily being abused by a parent, but their welfare. So we managed to take this category of alleged human trafficking, when we get the calls, they are allegations, and put them under our category of child welfare. And what's been good about that is it allows us to go out and see what's happening. And we've worked over the last year and a half collaboratively with law enforcement. We share information. We have some of the same cases, as I mentioned. Many of the cases that law enforcement is seeing, these are children that are either on open cases, we're already working with the family and we just didn't know, or it is maybe a new situation and we share information and work together to try to help the youth get the services that they need. To prevent this, we've done a lot of work. We've trained over 4,000 staff in what we call Human Trafficking 101, a lot about what just Patty talked about in terms of the history of it. I agree, we do call it slavery, the law behind it. New Jersey has very strong laws now. We trained our staff in terms of practice and policy about responding. I mentioned we worked with law enforcement. We've been involved collaboratively with our clinical partners. We have a program called Street Outreach through our adolescent program that actually contracts with Covenant House, and we get out on the streets and try to find these youth, meet them where they are, offer them services, offer them food, offer them a place to stay. We have a sister agency called Children's System of Care. They are a behavioral health agency. They are seeing a lot of these youth as well, and they provide clinical services. We have group homes and shelter beds that we are working to adjust and adapt to understanding the victim of human trafficking and the trauma that they may have been through. We've also done a lot of training with our resource parents. At-risk youth are often youth that have been or are in foster care. We call it resource care. Again, these kids have a lot of trauma that they've come with when they get to their resource home and often run away. And statistically, I don't have it exactly, but statistically, a youth that runs 3 or 4 times has a very high chance of being approached or being trafficked. So a lot of these youth we were finding are in our families that we're already working with. And it's interesting when you start to learn about it and you start to learn about the red flags and what the dynamics are, you start to recognize that some of these kids we've already met and that we're working with. So we've done a lot to help our resource parents understand our youth